Imagine being a well-respected judge cruising through the peaceful streets of your own neighborhood only to be pulled over by a police officer who assumes you've stolen your own car. What would you do if, despite your accomplishments and standing in the community, you were treated like a criminal simply because of the color of your skin? And when the truth finally surfaces, how do you think the officer would react upon realizing who you truly are? This shocking story of Judge Eli Matthews will leave you questioning the frequency of such incidents and the barriers that still stand in the way of true justice. Eli Matthews adjusted the rearview mirror of his newly purchased Audi, his pride gleaming in the polished exterior and the fresh scent of leather that filled the cabin. The car, a symbol of his hard work, was barely a week old, and Eli treated it with the utmost care as though it were a fragile artifact. The smooth hum of the engine and the gentle rhythm of jazz on the radio created a serene backdrop as he made his way home through the tree-lined streets of Somerset Hills, Maryland. It had been a long day at the courthouse. As a presiding judge, Eli had spent the hours navigating a maze of hearings, paperwork, and the often weighty dilemmas of those who came before him. These drives home were his sanctuary, a rare moment to exhale, reflect, and leave the burdens of the courtroom behind. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of picturesque suburban area with sprawling lawns, manicured hedges, and homes set back comfortably from the road. For Eli, it was a place of peace. But this evening, that peace was abruptly shattered. As Eli hummed softly to the smooth jazz, the piercing flash of red and blue lights filled his rear-view mirror. The tranquility of his evening was replaced by an unrelenting sense of dread. His fingers tightened instinctively around the steering wheel. The police cruiser behind him signaled for him to pull over. Confused but compliant, Eli did as instructed. He hadn't been speeding. In fact, he had been driving well under the speed limit, savoring the slow pace of the evening. There was no apparent reason for him to be stopped. A sharp knock on the driver's side window jolted Eli from his thoughts. Standing outside was a tall, broad-shouldered officer, her expression unreadable, and her hand resting conspicuously close to the firearm at her hip. License and registration, the officer barked, her voice devoid of warmth or courtesy. Eli, though surprised by her tone, complied without hesitation. He reached into the glove compartment and handed over the requested documents. Her nameplate read Officer Daniels, but she did not return the courtesy of acknowledging Eli's name. Instead, she snatched the papers from his hands and scanned them with narrowed eyes, her gaze darting back and forth between the documents and Eli. "Step out of the car," she ordered curtly. Eli blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" he asked, his voice measured. "Out." Now, Daniels repeated, her tone sharper, leaving no room for argument. For a moment, Eli hesitated. His mind raced to process the situation. He was a judge, a respected figure in the very community where this encounter was unfolding. This was his neighborhood, his street, his car. Yet, none of that seemed to matter. "Man, there must be some misunderstanding," Eli said, keeping his tone calm and professional. "I'm Judge Eli Matthews. This is my car, and I live just down the street." But Officer Daniels appeared unmoved. She raised an eyebrow, her hand shifting ever so slightly toward her holstered weapon. "Step out, now." Swallowing his indignation, Eli opened the door and stepped out. He wasn't about to escalate the situation. Not here, not now. He stood beside his car as Daniels began to circle him, her gaze cold and appraising. "We've had reports of a vehicle like this one stolen last week," she said, her voice accusatory, as though Eli had already been convicted of a crime. Eli's jaw tightened. "This is my car," he reiterated. "I purchased it from the dealership just a few days ago. If you run the plates, it'll come back clean." Daniels, however, didn't seem interested in listening. "Hands on the hood," she snapped. Eli's patience was fraying, but he complied. He placed his hands on the cool metal of his car's hood, feeling the weight of humiliation pressing down on him. He could feel the eyes of his neighbors, their curtains twitching as they peered out at the unfolding spectacle. Officer Daniels began to pat him down roughly, her movements devoid of respect or civility. "We've had reports of car thieves in the area," she repeated, as if justifying her actions. Eli clenched his jaw, his frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "I already told you. This car was purchased recently. If you'll allow me to explain." "Save it for the station," Daniels interrupted, reaching for her handcuffs. Eli's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. He wasn't just a citizen, he was a judge. He knew his rights. Officer Daniels, Eli said, his voice steady despite the fire simmering beneath. I suggest you call your superior before you make a decision you'll regret. Daniels hesitated, her hand hovering above the cuffs. For a moment, uncertainty flickered in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by defiance. You expect me to believe that? She challenged. Eli met her gaze, unwavering. I expect you to verify my identity and do your job properly. After a tense pause, Daniels finally reached for her radio. Muttering into the device, she requested confirmation of Eli's identity. The minutes that followed felt like an eternity. Eli stood there, his hands still resting on the hood of his car, while Daniels alternated between glaring at him and glancing at her radio. A tension was palpable. Neighbors continued to peek through their windows, their curiosity mingled with judgment. Eli felt the sting of humiliation keenly. No matter how successful he was, no matter how much he had achieved, here he was reduced to a suspect in his own neighborhood. Finally, the radio crackled to life. A voice on the other end barked out an urgent command. Daniels, stand down immediately. Judge Matthews is a respected member of the community. I'm on my way. Relief washed over Eli, but it was bittersweet. The damage had already been done. Moments later, another police car arrived. Captain Monroe, head of the local precinct, stepped out, his expression a mix of urgency and regret. Judge Matthews, he said as he approached, I can't begin to apologize enough for this incident. Rest assured we'll get to the bottom of it. Eli nodded, his composure intact despite the storm raging within him. Captain, he said, his voice steady, this wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was racial profiling. Monroe's face flushed with embarrassment, but Eli wasn't done. I'd like to speak with you and Officer Daniels, he continued, not as a victim, but as someone who believes we can turn this incident into an opportunity for real change. As they walked toward Monroe's car, Eli glanced back at the quiet street, the houses with their curtains still drawn. This was his neighborhood, his community. He had worked tirelessly to earn respect, to rise above the biases that sought to define him. And yet, in this moment, he realized that his journey was far from over. Eli knew that this incident could not be swept under the rug. It was more than just his story. It was a reflection of a system that needed to be challenged and reformed. This experience marked the beginning of a new chapter for Eli Matthews. As a judge, he had spent years upholding the law, but now he was determined to confront the biases within it. Little did he know his fight for justice was only beginning. This story of Judge Eli Matthews is a stark reminder of the challenges many faced, regardless of their accomplishments or status. It underscores the importance of addressing systemic issues in law enforcement and fostering conversations about justice, equality, and respect. Let this serve as a call to action, not just for those in power, but for all of us to strive for a world where dignity and fairness are afforded to everyone, regardless of race.